Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, hello and good morning from Jakarta. Welcome to FPCI GRIPS Conference on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific towards realization of the Indo-Pacific cooperation under AOIP. My name is Afni and I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, FPCI, in collaboration with the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, Japan. Today, I'm pleased to welcome all participants tuning in our channels from across Indonesia and also from abroad. We have attendees from Indonesia, Japan, Australia, United States, the Philippines, Uganda, Bulgaria, Kenya, Mali, Egypt, and many more. Before we continue, I would like to inform you that we provide live interpretation from English to Japanese. If you're joining from Zoom, you can click on the bottom right of your screen for language options. Ladies and gentlemen, FPCI and GRIPS see the importance of the Indo-Pacific region as a new geopolitical concept which needs to be continuously discussed, debated, and questioned by foreign policy communities in the region. Since the adoption of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific in 2019, all ASEAN partners have acknowledged and supported the AOIP, including China. The spirit of inclusivity of the outlooks made the AOIP a bridge of differences. However, many experts are also critical of the outlook. Many of them question what would be the next steps after the adoption. Should ASEAN produce another next document as a follow-up to it? How does the outlook place itself in other countries' concepts, such as with the Japanese free and open Indo-Pacific? To answer those questions, today we are joined by a number of distinguished panelists from inside the region, as well as our dialogue partners. Our speakers consist of experts from Indonesia, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, as well as Japan, India, the United States, Australia, and China. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference will be divided into two sessions. The first, reviewing the Indo-Pacific geopolitical constellation in 2022, inclusivity, free and open, and ASEAN centrality. And the second one would be revisiting ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, implementation and development. Please make sure to stay tuned for the next 3 hours to follow the whole agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, now to kick off our conference, I would like to invite Ambassador Yutaka Imura, Senior Fellow at GRIPS Alliance and former Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, for his welcoming remarks. Ambassador Imura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Afuni. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone listening to this conference. I'm very happy to be with you today. First of all, I would like to express my deep appreciation to my friends in FPCI, and particularly, although he is not present today, Dino Patijalan, Ambassador Dino Patijalan, my old friend since the time when he was assistant to president of Sushiro Bamban Yudhoyono. And we have been working together since already some time by organizing public forum on variety of international issues of mutual interest and Southeast Asia Japan Track 1.5 dialogue. GRIPS also participated to this November's Global Town Hall, which is, I believe, FPCI's flagship event. Our foreign minister, Yoshimasa Hayashi, had an honor to speak on Japan's policy toward ASEAN. And also, I would also like to show appreciation for those participating today for the research institutions in ASEAN and its dialogue partners. ASEAN is indeed one of the most important international partners for Japan and for many countries in this area. We consider it crucial for us to deepen our understanding of each other's thinking, further strengthening the partnership. The cooperation in the Indo-Pacific is one of the most important urgent issues we need to discuss, not only between us, but also together with ASEAN partner countries. Today, we have gathered virtually under the theme towards realization of the Indo-Pacific cooperation under the AOIP to assess the current strategic environments in the region and try to find the ways leading to the realization of the AOIP. I assume that the research institutions, particularly those from non-ASEAN member countries that are interested in cooperating with ASEAN's AOIP, have a keen interest in knowing how ASEAN member countries are going to proceed with their AOIP initiatives. In this sense, this conference takes place very in timely as we have just finished ASEAN's summit and ASEAN-related summit just a week ago, and we I think we have seen a very concrete outcome in terms of promoting the AOIP, but I will touch upon that later on. Japan has been actively involved in the realization of the regional economic frameworks, such as RCEP and CPTPP. Meanwhile, in 2016, if you remember, late Prime Minister Abe of Japan proposed the free and open Indo-Pacific initiative. The three pillars of the initiative were, first, the promotion of the rule of law.
It seems that Ambassador Imura is having trouble. Okay, you're back. You may have the floor again, Ambassador.
I'm back? Okay.
Yes.
So I continue, right? Okay.
Yes, please.
Third, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay. Third, the commitment to peace and stability through the strengthening of law enforcement capacity at sea, humanitarian aid, and emergency disaster relief, among others. In 2019, ASEAN countries adopted, on the initiative of Indonesian government, the AOIP at the summit. Several other ASEAN dialogue partners also made public their own proposals on the Indo-Pacific cooperation. Many countries, including Japan, already expressed their support for the AOIP and have been showing their willingness to cooperate in its realization. Nevertheless, in the past 3 years, the situation regarding the AOIP has dramatically changed. First, the pandemics have occurred, dealing a heavy blow to the economies of all over the world. It has apparently slowed down the process leading to the AOIP realization. Second, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February this year not only shook the very foundation of international order, intensifying geopolitical tension around the world, and in addition to the serious public health problems caused by the pandemic, provoked further difficulties in many countries in Asia and elsewhere in the area of energy supply and prices, food shortage, and inflation, among others. We should not overlook neither the repeated nuclear threat made by Russia and non-discriminatory use of arms against civilian population, provoking fear and anxiety around the world, and further worsening international atmosphere. On the other hand, US-China rivalries continues, even under the Biden administration, destabilizing the situation in the Pacific. There is no sign that China will cease its rapid military expansion and its activities to try to change the status quo by the use of force. Given these circumstances, it is becoming even more important to work harder for open and inclusive regional operation so that the Indo-Pacific can become the ocean of peace and prosperity instead of strategic competition and of military conflicts. In considering the regional cooperation in the Pacific from this perspective, I would like to point out a few points that I believe should be borne in mind. First of all, it is important to respect the centrality of ASEAN. Looking back at the history of the architectures of cooperation in the region, we can see that almost all of them were promoted by leading ASEAN member countries and built around ASEAN. I would dare to say that geopolitically speaking, ASEAN seems to have the mission to be the center of regional cooperation. Second, we should respect the guiding principles of the international order, such as the rule of law, freedom of navigation, as well as openness and inclusiveness. The AOIP should be open to all countries in the region willing to cooperate. In this sense, good news is that China, which has been originally reluctant to accept the idea of ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific, seems to have been shifting its stance in favor of ASEAN's position since President Jokowi's visit to China several months ago. If you remember, China's new position was clearly stated in the joint communique issued after the summit between Indonesia and China. Third, several ASEAN dialogue partners, including Japan, Republic of Korea, and India, and among others, have already presented concrete cooperation projects for the AOIP at the summit with ASEAN. But in order to give new momentum to the AOIP and to develop a community for regional cooperation in true sense of the word, it is important for ASEAN to take the initiative to draw the roadmap for promoting the AOIP, thus encouraging its partners to come up with practical projects in 4 key areas identified in the AOIP. In this sense, we welcome wholeheartedly ASEAN leaders' declaration on mainstreaming 4 priority areas of the AOIP within ASEAN-led mechanism adopted at the ASEAN summit in Phnom Penh. I guess we can probably hear the explanation on the part of ASEAN friends regarding the meaning of this declaration today. I sincerely hope that based upon the recent positive development, today's forum will give us an opportunity to deepen our understanding about each other's position on the issues related to the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much. I pass the floor to my friend from Indonesia.
Thank you for your kind remarks, Ambassador Imura. Before we start the first session, let us hear opening remarks from Ambassador Iwan Wiranata Atmaja, Senior Fellow at FPCI and former Ambassador of Indonesia to Bangladesh and Iran. Ambassador Iwan, you may have the floor now.
Thank you.
You're still unmuted, sir.
I'm sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and greetings from Jakarta. Welcome to the FPCI GRIPS conference on ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. First of all, on behalf of Ambassador Dino Patijalal and Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, I would like to extend our gratitude to Ambassador Yutaka Imura and his team at National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, for your cooperation and friendship with FPCI in making this conference possible. I would like also to, to welcome 9 distinguished speakers and 2 moderators from 10 Indo-Pacific countries. Thank you for your participation. I would like also to thank for over 300 registered participants from 30 countries for making the time to participate in the conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our conference today is one of the first in the early days of Indonesia's chairmanship in ASEAN to discuss specifically the ASEAN Outlook on Indonesia on Indo-Pacific. I see the importance of the Indo-Pacific region as a new geopolitical concept that needs to be continuously discussed, debated, and developed by the foreign policy communities in the region. I have no doubt about the strategic value of the concept. However, to make it successful, we should ensure it is inclusive and open to all. Because the Indo-Pacific region is too big to be covered by only ASEAN or a few countries, we need everybody to contribute and provide support. The theme of our conference is towards realization of the Indo-Pacific cooperation under AOIP. I hope the theme of the conference will stimulate a debate that focuses on answering the question of how to realize and operate the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific since its introduction in 2019. What makes this conference special is the diverse participation of 9 speakers and 2 moderators who are coming from different Indo-Pacific countries, namely Indonesia, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, India, Australia, and the US. In 3 hours of virtual conference, we will have 2 sessions, the first of which will focus on assessing the current geopolitical trend in the Indo-Pacific, and the second of which will focus on exploring the implementation of AOIP. The format of the conference is track 2 and open to the public. I hope that the conference will benefit not only officials, but only the general public. Once again, thank you for your participations. Thank you to our partners, GRIPS, for the collaboration. And I hope that throughout the conference, you will gain a lot of new perspective and ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks, Ambassador Iwan. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us start today's discussion. Allow me to invite our moderator for the first session, Dr. Shofwan Albana. He is a lecturer at Universitas Indonesia and fellow at FPCI. Dr. Shofwan, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Afni. Again, I would like to extend our welcome to excellencies and all participants who are coming today at this virtual event. In the first session, we would like to have a discussion on reviewing the Indo-Pacific geopolitical constellation in 2022, inclusivity, free and open, and ASEAN centrality. As already put forth by the MC and also Ambassador Imura and Ambassador Iwan, the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific is a very important concept which is introduced by ASEAN in response to the increasing importance of the region and the introduction of the Indo-Pacific as a concept. It is not the only concept introduced in the region. We have the free and open Indo-Pacific vision by Japan. We have the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative by India. We have Indo-Pacific Strategy of the United States this year. We also have even countries outside the region, such as France and Germany, have their own Indo-Pacific guidelines, and France also have document of France and security in Indo-Pacific, showing the importance of this region, especially with the increasing geopolitical tension. It is also interesting to note that while most of the external actors mentioned that they are supportive of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, we still do not see a more concrete operationalization of the concept in terms of real how it is translated into real cooperation in the region, and how it can really establish what it envisioned, such as inclusivity. Yeah, especially because the introduction of the concept itself, the concept of Indo-Pacific itself, was driven geopolitically, and many see this as something that is contradictory to the idea of inclusivity. So how influential is the concept? How feasible and how acceptable is ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, and how actually different actors perceive the AOIP? That would be among the questions that we would like to discuss today. And today we have 4 panelists with us to start the discussion. First, we have Ambassador Piper Campbell, the Administrative Director for the ASEAN Studies Initiative at the American University. Good evening, Ambassador Piper. It's nice to see you here again. And then we also have Ambassador Gurjit Singh, the Board of Advisors at Rising Asia Foundation, India. Good morning, Ambassador. And then we also have Dr. Sun Sam, Policy Analyst at Royal Academy of Cambodia. And last but not least, we have Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, the Executive Deputy Chairman at the RSIS. So without further ado, first I would like to give some minutes for the speakers to provide their initial comments on the prospect of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, and how it could be translated into a more operational framework for cooperation in the region, and how external actors are actually perceiving the AOIP. Or is it like ASEAN centrality? Everyone says that, oh, okay, ASEAN centrality is good, but actually not much is done to really respect that, according to many or some comments. So first, I would like to ask Ambassador Piper Campbell.
Dr. Safwan, thank you so much. It's evening here, but I will say selamat pagi for my friends and colleagues in Indonesia. And just to say thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this dialogue, which I know is going to be so interesting. I was excited already, but hearing Ambassador Iwan and Ambassador Imura make some really good points in their opening remarks has got me even more excited. And Safwan, I know you and knew that you would create an interesting environment. And I think your comments just now as you opened certainly did that as well. I approached this question with sort of a mixed feeling, optimistic on one part, but also really questioning on another. And so I thought I'd sort of start just briefly with that as my introductory comments. Now, and of course, I'm coming at this primarily from an American perspective, but happily outside of government now, so I get to speak in a personal capacity and kind of take a slightly more academic approach, which is actually much more fun, I must say. So as I was thinking about the issue, one of the things I did was to look at the more recent US government positions and statements around ASEAN centrality, and also looking at what the United States has both said and done in respect to the ASEAN Outlook in recent times. And something that I found quite interesting, looking at US statements around the time of the East Asia Summit, was not only the, let's say, predictable emphasis on ASEAN centrality and an emphasis on the importance of ASEAN within Indo-Pacific concepts, whether those be the US concept or others' concepts of what this region is and where ASEAN fits within it, but was actually the explicit reference as well to the ASEAN Outlook. And an emphasis not just on sort of giving the outlook sort of a couple lines in the statements, but rather emphasizing that the range of initiatives that the United States was launching as part of its elevation of its relationship with ASEAN to a strategic relationship, that the initiatives were designed to support the 4 pillars of the ASEAN Outlook, mainly maritime cooperation, connectivity, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and economic cooperation. So I found it quite interesting that the United States was emphasizing in this way that the efforts of the United States with ASEAN were aligned to the areas that ASEAN itself had identified in the outlook. And for me, that's something that I find to be positive and interesting, especially in this space of thinking about how do we operationalize, as you said. I was serving as the head of the US mission to ASEAN in 2018, when the idea of ASEAN taking its own, creating its own perspective on the Indo-Pacific first really emerged. And I will say at that time, there were some who were within ASEAN who were skeptical about the idea of taking a position on the Indo-Pacific. There were some who wanted to maintain this smaller region, right? The region of ASEAN, as opposed to placing ASEAN, but emphasizing ASEAN centrality within a bigger region. Indonesia was one of the countries that really took a leadership role in developing the idea of an ASEAN outlook for the Indo-Pacific, building support on that from within ASEAN. And then I think it is absolutely predictable and positive that Indonesia is now taking this next step of asking this question of how do we operationalize this? How do we move this forward? So that's the positive part of what I've been thinking about as I've prepared for this conversation. But the less positive part is something else that I noticed as I was looking at President Biden's remarks, including his remarks as delivered at the annual US ASEAN Summit that took place simultaneous with the East Asia Summit. And one of the terms that he used in his remarks while speaking about the importance of the US-ASEAN relationship and the US commitment to ASEAN centrality, and talking about how ASEAN is at the heart of the administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, which I'm not sure is exactly where ASEAN wants to be, but so I found that terminology somewhat interesting. But he talked about how the United States wants to strengthen our commitment to work in lockstep with an empowered and unified ASEAN. And that word empowered really jumped out at me because I think it's an important question of what steps that ASEAN believes among ASEAN members, does ASEAN see itself as empowered? What aspects would it see as being important towards maintaining that empowerment and maintaining that unity? And something that I hope perhaps we can elaborate on as this conversation continues is, frankly, some differences in opinion, perhaps, between members of ASEAN and partners as to what steps might need to be taken to see a more empowered and unified ASEAN. So I'll stop there for now.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador. A very important comment and reminder on the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, that it seems that the United States, which is very much involved in the introduction and the emergence of the concept of Indo-Pacific, is actually responding to ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. And many even say that the US is socialized into ASEAN way by becoming more receptive to ASEAN's ideas by, for example, adapting its initiative in the region, matching ASEAN's idea, and also some even giving comments that even the US is socializing into ASEAN way by the Indo-Pacific economic framework, which is unclear in the beginning and defined along the way, which is not very American. It's pretty much more ASEAN than American style. So what would happen with that, we will discuss further later, but I would like to give the opportunity for Ambassador Gurjit Singh to give your initial comment for 5 minutes, please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Professor. And I must thank Ambassador Iwan and Ambassador Kimura for their opening statements, and I enjoyed listening to Ambassador Campbell. Thank you, FPCI, for inviting your partner, Rising Asia Foundation, who I represent today. Yes, indeed, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is indeed an extremely important thing at this time. So let me begin with the beginning. First, congratulations to Cambodia, ASEAN and other summits done without rancor and controversy this time. Second, whenever Indonesia chairs ASEAN, good things happen. So I think there is the burden of expectations on Indonesia this time, and we need to look at how Indonesia would do. Whatever we could support Indonesia, we would be happy to do. Thirdly, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific in many ways was an Indonesian outlook. And Indonesia then decided to take it to ASEAN rather than issue it as its own outlook. So I am not very clear whether under its chairmanship now, Indonesia wants to develop the ASEAN outlook or its version of the ASEAN outlook. For us in India, an Indonesian version of the ASEAN outlook will actually be something that we would greatly appreciate. Because let's be honest, neither ASEAN centrality nor ASEAN unity are what they were. Now let's come to India. So India recognizes ASEAN centrality, and like everybody else, we have also signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. But we would be very regretful if the AOIP was to become another TAC. So India has not only acknowledged the AOIP, but we have the India-ASEAN joint statement on how AOIP and the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative of India will work together. Both these are not strategic concepts in a political sense, but are functional concepts. And the 4 pillars of AOIP are hardly strategic in that sense. They are covering SDGs, economic cooperation, connectivity, and maritime areas, without is gently keeping away from the security angle. And that is why you can happily say, oh, that even China endorses us, is because you are not really strategic in that sense. The AOIP is what Europe is following now with their. It is not, as you have tried to make out, the same as the Japanese, Australian, Indian, or the US concepts of Indo-Pacific. These, your partners in the East Asia Summit, who are Quad members, have a nuanced difference from the AOIP, which is that we are strategic. And India wishes to have that strategic idea acknowledged by having ASEAN member states work with us on the IPOI. Now, when it comes to this partnership, the India-ASEAN statement only acknowledges the 4 AOIP pillars. It doesn't really acknowledge the IPOI pillars. But we are happy that Indonesia and Singapore, from among ASEAN, are working with India on some pillars of the AOIP, even though they are non-strategic. We would expect other ASEAN countries to come and join the IPOI pillars for cooperation, like we are doing with Australia and Japan. We would expect particularly Vietnam to come forth and join, and then hopefully others would also see the way forward. India believes that the AOIP is a partial response to the Indian Ocean. For us, the Indian Ocean does not end with India. It goes up to the shores of Africa, which the AOIP does not cover. So therefore, for us, the AOIP is a partial response to the Indian Ocean policy, and we needed to, from our point of view, we look at it much beyond. India, when it chaired the Security Council in 2021, for that month, we had a special session focusing on maritime security. And we have taken over yesterday, along with the G20 chairmanship, the chairmanship of the Security Council for December 2022. And this time, we will be focusing on terrorism in a special session. Now, this terrorism is extremely important, but the AOIP doesn't mention it, and ASEAN often does not talk about it. But if you look to the west of India, to the Western Indian Ocean, terrorism is a major threat in our neighborhood in particular. So we need to get the gamut of issues which are strategically important to be acknowledged. Finally, what should India do? India would continue to support ASEAN, particularly on the AOIP. We look forward to working with Indonesia as ASEAN chair, like we did when they were the G20 chair, and did a great role to bring the squabbling countries together. Now, one thing I would like to say, that we would like ASEAN countries to implement the AOIP beyond the AOIP. The AOIP is like a tap, which, of the concept of ASEAN centrality, which everybody subscribes to. But all ASEAN countries cannot do what one of them can do. So I think we need for ASEAN member states to engage with their partners under the AOIP in a comprehensive manner, but by themselves, because each one's interests are different. And I think the idea of inclusivity, this is the contradiction. The AOIP tries to be inclusive because it does not want to name the problem in the room. whereas the Indo-Pacific policies of its partners are all clearly to counteract China, which is the problem in the area. So unless you acknowledge that China is a problem, your AOIP is going to be like attack. So I'm not saying that you come out guns blazing against China, but at least acknowledge that there is a problem. I know China is a big economic partner for ASEAN. So is it for India. But does that mean that we will not challenge them when they challenge the rules with which we do not agree? So therefore, I don't think the AOIP has in it the ability to challenge any one country or support any one country. Therefore, we must look for implementation with individual member states with whom India would share a strategic perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for the clear, direct, and frank discussion on your perspective and India's perspective on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. It highlights several important aspects. First, that there are different understanding of Indo-Pacific in terms of where Indo-Pacific actually start and ends. Some cover until India, some even reach to Africa. It also highlights the importance of ASEAN. ASEAN always want others to listen to ASEAN, but sometimes ASEAN not giving enough attention to other initiatives such as the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, probably. So maybe there need to be more discussion on how to connect both initiatives well. And also very important highlight on is the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, which focus on inclusivity, is a contradictio in terminis. It's contradictory in itself because Indo-Pacific is a concept which is emerged as an effort to manage the Chinese problem by many other great powers. But we will dig deeper into those problems, those issues. We will go to Cambodia. I'm inviting Dr. Seon Sam from the Royal Academy of Cambodia. He already put some provocations in the chat room, so you could as well check that. Doctor, please.
Thank you so much, Sowan, for your invitation, and I would like to pay my humble respects to Ambassador Imura, Ambassador Gurit Singh, and Ambassador Iwan. And it is always be my pleasure to talk to the Ambassador Imura from Japan and all friends from around the world who are participating in this discussion right now. First of all, I would like to say I'm not representing the government of Cambodia, and I will talk and express my the ideas on behalf of myself, but not on behalf of the government of Cambodia. First, I think I will go in brief because Indo-Pacific become one of the most complicated discussion topic here in Cambodia. So far, I have different ideas on the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework of the U.S. government, and then in May this year, I also published different ideas in English language here in Cambodia on the Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S. government. But however, I think when we talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy, in my mind, I always remember the speech of the former Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe, who is the one that talked and initiated these words in 2007. And then declared by former President Donald Trump in 2017, when he was in Vietnam. That was the time that the U.S. started to talk on the Indo-Pacific strategy. But because the United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world, and many ASEAN countries, such as Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, and so on. Many of our ASEAN countries, including Cambodia, we have the very good relation with all countries in the world, including the United States and China. But because the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States government just contain 7 members of the ASEAN countries, excluding Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, who are not joining in the IPEF of the US government. So in that case, I do not mean that Cambodia want to participate in that or something. I don't know, I don't understand, and because it is not my own responsibility to decide whether Cambodia should join in the US Indo-Pacific strategy or not. But because if we look at the EU, Japan, South Korea, and even the and ASEAN, we also have the Indo-Pacific strategy. I mean, like, because in ASEAN we have the AOIP. I think this is the great time, and it is very good for ASEAN to have the AOIP with the specific goals to describe its strategy. Because if the ASEAN do not have the AOIP during this time, it would be very hard for ASEAN, because here in Cambodia, if you read the news in English or in Khmer language, we always hear about the competition between the United States and China in ASEAN. And there are some scholars and some journalists who like to publish article here in Cambodia, article that ASEAN was forced to take side between the United States and China. And then some country, like for example, Cambodia, was interpreted as the clan state of China or something like that. But even though that is just the ideas, that is just the interpretation of to judge this country is biased to that country, and another country, the member of each member of ASEAN is biased to this, and another one is biased to that. That is just different ideas on each member of ASEAN toward the powerful countries, especially toward United States and China. So in my personal idea, I will be very short, and I just would say it is the good time for ASEAN, and especially for the Indonesia, that will be the next ASEAN chairman in next year, to talk and to implement, and especially to talk as much as possible on the AOIP. Because when we talk about the ASEAN centrality, even the ambassador, our ambassador just like to talk the ASEAN centrality, but it is very hard for ASEAN to talk about its own centrality if ASEAN does not have something that is their own. So in brief, again, I would like to repeat my words that it is the good time for ASEAN to work on their own, and to have something that is their own strategy, and to have something that is their own policy. Because otherwise, if ASEAN does not have a clear policy to implement what is their own policy, that will be very hard for ASEAN to keep balancing among the powerful countries. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samsun. Very important reminder also for ASEAN on the importance of having a clearer direction and clearer strategy on what ASEAN as a community, as a group, would like to pursue in regards to the region, and yeah, especially in this context of increasing geopolitical tension. So last but not least, I would like to invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yeong to provide his insights on this matter. 5 minutes, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, moderator. I am from Singapore, but I believe my value here is as a former Secretary General of ASEAN. I am requested to talk a bit about ASEAN centrality and the AOIP. The starting point for this discussion is really that AOIP was ASEAN's response to the various discussions in the Asia-Pacific on what is the strategic concept, what is the course of action going forward in terms of multilateral cooperation, tackling of the issues and challenges in the Indo-Pacific as ASEAN and other countries outside of ASEAN see those challenges. So the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, or what we now simply call AOIP, is actually a narrative under which ASEAN member states bring in all the different traits and different pieces of initiatives that ASEAN has done over the past 50 over years. And the starting point of AOIP is basically what we always talk about, which is that ASEAN as a Southeast Asian regional organization, we have constructed an inclusive, open architecture for our region, Southeast Asia, to engage with the big guys and the small guys and anybody who want to come to Southeast Asia and make friends, do business, and coexist with us. So AOIP built on that. And if you look at all the documents that we have concluded since 2019 when AOIP was first promulgated, I don't think you will come to the same conclusion as what some of you have said so far, that nothing has happened. So the first point is that AOIP built on ASEAN centrality. ASEAN centrality revolves around the interesting concept of an ASEAN-centered set of mechanisms and processes which ASEAN member states have done in the last 50 years to cooperate with one another and to engage other parties outside of Southeast Asia. So it is not something that you see from the United States or Japan or European countries or India, which evolved from a very strategic, security-oriented calculation, given the circumstances of the last 2-3 decades. No. So, second point is that going forward, ASEAN believes that the AOIP is a living document. It should be included in all our discussion with ASEAN dialogue partner, and there are 11 of them now, the latest being the United Kingdom, as well as all other countries interested in engaging Southeast Asian nations. So over time, you will see more and more things being added onto it. But otherwise now, I'd like to urge all of us to go and look at the document called AOIP. And also to look at 3 important documents which has been concluded by ASEAN and its dialogue partner, namely Japan, India, and Australia in the last 3 years. Japan was the first country, first ASEAN dialogue partner to follow up on the 2019 AOIP and spell out some actions to operationalize what has been discussed in the AOIP. Which actually to the Japanese may not appear new, because those activities, those initiatives which ASEAN put into the AOIP come from the ASEAN community building. Our ASEAN community is based on 3 pillars: political security, cooperation, economic integration, and socio-cultural development and cooperation. So if you look at the ASEAN-Japan joint statement on Indo-Pacific cooperation, specifically on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, signed on November 2020. Yeah, this is quite simple, but it is the beginning of a more detailed joint statement with India, signed on October 2021, where all the elements that Mr. Gurjit Singh talked about were distilled into specific paragraphs for ASEAN-India cooperation on how to make the Indo-Pacific peaceful, secure, and mutually benefiting for everybody. Then the latest one that we just concluded in Cambodia in November, 2 weeks ago, at the ASEAN Summit, is this ASEAN-Australia joint statement on AOIP. And this is the classic document which we should be using for future guidance on all ASEAN joint statement with any other joint partners or fellow partners on the AOIP, because it's spelled out in details, many different paragraphs. So don't say that there is no action. Those people who say there are no action on AOIP only reflect you did not read all the documents and you don't follow what has transpired in all the smaller discussion meeting outside the media glare of ASEAN Summit with our dialogue partners. So the latest document, I recommend you, and I have sent it to our chat box in this Zoom session, yeah, at 10:32 a.m. this morning. It is a very detailed document on how Australia and ASEAN will cooperate with each other on implementing what has been in the AOIP. What is in the AOIP? Nothing new. It is basically a reiteration of all the ASEAN agenda which have been developed over the last 55 years of ASEAN existence. But it is now envisioned as an ASEAN community, and there are 4 main sectors. Yeah, we talk about maritime zone, we talk about connectivity, we talk about sustainable development going forward, and we talk about economic agreement which ASEAN has already concluded with all the other dialogue partners, especially RCEP. So if you look at these sets of documents, it would clearly demonstrate that ASEAN has not been just having a piece of paper called AOIP and no further action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very nice intervention to start our further discussion by reminding us that ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific is actually alive and well, and it is a living document. It keeps being added with different ways to operationalize and to implement, including the latest development, which is agreed with Australia. It's not nothing. It is affecting and impactful to the relationship in the region. So having said that, I think it would be interesting to start a more interactive engagement with all of the speakers. I think some of the highlights that converge here is that while ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific is considered as an important document, and some cooperations have emerged from it, some also still consider that it is going to be another example of a lowest common denominator problem in which many issues are included, but the most important one is not included. I mean, talking about different initiatives which is already there in Southeast in Indo-Pacific, but now framed as a vision, as an outlook, but avoiding to be what Ambassador Singh mentioned, strategic, by avoiding the issue of China explicitly. So I would like to ask to all of the speakers on this. I mean, is it ideal? Is it okay to move with this current version of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific as a living document, which touch upon multiple issues, but avoid the geopolitical reality that the Indo-Pacific concept itself is actually developed to in response to the rise of China. And if ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific is not explicitly strategic, but in itself is strategic because it is saying that it is important to develop an inclusive region, how to make this work amidst different Indo-Pacific initiatives that is going on. I would like to start with Ambassador Piper. Do you have any?
And I see also that Ambassador Imura has his hand up, and I'm just not sure. Do you?
We will go to a more open discussion with the audience later. But maybe yes, we can start with Ambassador Imura. Do you would like to give some intervention, Ambassador? Please. You are still muted. Yes.
Yes, I'm terribly sorry. I'm afraid that I'm disturbing a procedure. Maybe if my tongue for the time being, I think it's the turn of all the speakers who discuss among each other. Then probably I'll be happy to intervene. So please go ahead with your plan of procedure.
Yeah, but you yeah, okay, so you will be the first
Yes.
response later.
Thank you very much.
Now we will go with the speakers first for some time, and we will go back to you, Ambassador. Okay, Ambassador Campbell, please.
So I think we've gotten to really one of the critical questions, which is how do we think about, first of all, how do we think about the Indo-Pacific? How big is what we're talking about when we talk about the Indo-Pacific, as Ambassador noted. From an Indian perspective, it goes all the way to West Africa. And so a challenge for us in this conversation is that the area that we're speaking about when we think about and speak about ASEAN is not the same as the area of the Indo-Pacific. And so when we talk about centrality and when we say that ASEAN central, the concept of ASEAN centrality means one thing related to the members of ASEAN and the centrality of ASEAN within the members, as Ambassador Ong Keng-yong was the point that he was making. But when you think about the broader Indo-Pacific and then you think about ASEAN as a subset within that, centrality means a different thing in that context. I think that means a different thing, both kind of in a geographic context, but also in terms of the choice that was made in the Outlook to cover a range of issues on which there was agreement within ASEAN, and to exclude other issues, to exclude some of the strategic issues, to exclude some of the aspects of competition in the region. And what is excluded from the ASEAN Outlook reduces the scope of the outlook, and on some level reduces the importance of the outlook. And I think that's a real challenge.
Yeah, thank you very much. To be inclusive, the paradox is you have to exclude some things, but how far this can go? Can we go with this paradox continuously? Ambassador Singh, do you want to give comments on that?
Thank you. So I think Ambassador Ong from Singapore was chastising us for not reading enough and being unaware perhaps, but let me assure him that we love ASEAN and we read almost everything that ASEAN does. And I will send him some of my things on how I perceive things. So, but let me be brutally honest. If you wanted an inclusive organization, you had the EAS. Why do you need a new one if the EAS is working? The EAS has everybody in the region and beyond. Now you are saying we will have the AOIP and we will then go to EAS partners essentially. You're beginning with the Quad partners. So that is a kind of a quiet recognition of the Quad, because your first three partners for the AOIP are Japan, India, and Australia, who are the Quad. Why do you need to sign new things for them if the East Asia Summit, which is an ASEAN-centric body, was working? So the conclusion is the Indo-Pacific is not an ASEAN-centric pole. As India, we would like ASEAN to be a pole in the multipolar world. Just as we like the Quad countries, we like Africa, we like Europe. But if ASEAN does not pull its weight, then it weakens a pole. And India wants to work with ASEAN to strengthen our arrangement so that we are not dependent on others to look after our region. And that is where I think the IPOI and the AOIP work together, but respecting ASEAN procedures. That is why I said that we have to look at the AOIP and IPOI beyond them and allow individual member states who are comfortable with certain pillars to work together. And this is not an anti-Chinese statement. It is to work together on what we can. With Singapore, in IPOI, we are working on science and academics, not strategic, but we cannot ignore the strategic consequence. That's all. Rest, let us go ahead and work with the AOIP, work with the IPOI, work with what the Australians and the Japanese are saying. And yes, India does discuss with the US, with Japan, and with Australia, bilaterally and as a Quad, the role of ASEAN, the AOIP, the Indo-Pacific and beyond. We think the AOIP is a good enabling document. Now let's come to doing something. So it's not and I'm sorry, Ambassador Ong, to my mind, signing new agreements is not doing much. You look under the IPOI and what India has done with Singapore. There is movement, there's workshops happening, there is interaction, there are things happening. I think that is where AOIP will go. And that is what we hope Indonesia will hasten. That is what we are looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. And since a lot of comments are directly a response to Ambassador Ong, I would like to ask Ambassador Ong to also directly and brutally honest to respond to Ambassador Singh, please.
Well, if Mr. Singh feels that way, I can't do anything about it. But my point is that I am not talking about ASEAN moving away from East Asia Summit or ASEAN going to do other things which, create new mechanism or processes. What I am trying to put across from my few minutes just now is to say that AOIP is not a new thing which ASEAN concocted in response to other Indo-Pacific concept being advocated by United States of America, Japan, or other countries. What I'm saying is that in the light of all these concepts put out by the other countries outside of Southeast Asia, ASEAN came together and said, we don't have to come out with a new format or a new agreement or a new strategy or what have you, because we already have ASEAN centrality revolving around an ASEAN-centered set of mechanisms in Southeast Asia's engagement with the rest of the world. And from there, we say that we put together all these elements, tie them all together into what we call the AOIP. And it wasn't in Singapore or ASEAN or anybody wanting to sign agreement with anybody. When we did the first agreement on AOIP with Japan in 2020, it was the Japanese request. Similarly, when India signed the joint statement with ASEAN in October 2021 on the AOIP, it was India's persistence. Yeah, it was a deliverable for Mr. Modi's visit to the ASEAN summit. Yeah, so ASEAN as a group, we are open, we are rules-based, we follow precedent, we try our best to be as nuanced as we can, because we know that we have to take the world as it is. So if other countries, other partners of ASEAN would like to do certain documentation, would like to do certain initiative to highlight the purpose of their respective leaders' visit to the ASEAN summit, we try to oblige. So ASEAN as a group, very, very, very rarely go out there and say, I want to do an agreement with you. No. So I think if we can understand the ASEAN culture of operation, which is based on the Southeast Asian culture of always welcoming visitors to our region, showing hospitality, and not being offensive to any of the things that the visitor would like to do as they come and visit our region. That is the way we work. Yeah, so don't get me wrong. Yeah, ASEAN is devoted to the East Asia Summit. Yeah, in fact, we hope that India can be a more proactive player in the East Asia Summit. Yeah, ASEAN will do things with other dialogue partners, yeah, in the interest of ASEAN as a whole. Yeah, we don't want people to come to Southeast Asia and do whatever they want to do without consideration for the interest of the ASEAN member states. ASEAN member states, within ourselves, we have disagreement, we are very diverse, yes, but at the same time, we have a collective position. Yeah, sometimes because of that collectivity element, yeah, we have been put into the corner somewhere. For example, now we have the Myanmar crisis, and different countries in ASEAN have different ideas of how to deal with the situation. So we are in a corner somewhere. But overall, we do not want to dictate how, yeah, the Southeast Asian region should be managed. But we thought we construct all these engagement forums, platforms, and when India or when Japan or when anybody would like to do something in furtherance of their own strategic calculation vis-a-vis Southeast Asia, in relation to what they have with other big powers, like for example, now this concept of Indo-Pacific, okay, we come, we sit down and talk, we take the world as it is. We know that if India decided to do something on Indian Ocean or Indo-Pacific strategy, ASEAN cannot object to it. So what we do is to integrate our own desire, our own core interests in a very palatable manner with what India wants to do in this particular instance. Similarly with Japan, yeah, but Japan was the first mover on AOIP. Therefore, you see the ASEAN-Japan joint statement, the AOIP, yeah, is a very skeletal kind of document. Yeah, whereas the latest one, which Australia would like to do with ASEAN on AOIP, is a very elaborate, almost A to Z kind of document. So we went along because our ASEAN principle is we reach out. You want to engage me and you want to do it this way, if we can accommodate, we will accommodate. Yeah. For now, let me reiterate, ASEAN is committed to East Asia Summit. We want to do more. ASEAN is committed to ARF. We're going to do more. ASEAN is committed to ASEAN Defense Minister Plus with all the dialogue partner country. We're going to do more. Yeah. But above all this, we have today, this is discussion on AOIP. So I'm just trying to set in context, yeah, how the AOIP is being perceived by our leadership, not by our media, not by our intellectuals like now what we are doing, yeah, but our leadership's perception of how it is. Yeah. And by the way, I have stressed repeatedly, I'm here in my role as a former Secretary General, and I am not talking about a Singapore foreign policy position. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very clear response to the comments by Ambassador Campbell as well as Ambassador Singh, and reminding us on there are different of perceptions and interpretation of ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, and that's why this kind of discussion is important to clarify the expectations and interpretations of different actors. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong. And among those interpretation is pretty much related to the tension between collectivity, ASEAN centrality, as well as the interest of different ASEAN members. So I would like to ask Dr. Samsun to have some comments on it, because Cambodia has just completed his duty as the chairman of ASEAN, but also often mentioned bilaterally as having a unique position also in related to China. Do you have any comments on that?
Thank you so much, Sopan. And thank you, Ambassador Ong, for your I like your ideas a lot. I mean, because for all the times, I mean, I remember that I've been to the ASEAN Secretariat and in Jakarta for 3 different times when we discuss about policy, and there are people who always complained about the ASEAN strategy and the ASEAN work, and because if we travel outside of ASEAN countries, people will have different perspective and different ideas when they start to talk on ASEAN. But if we go back to the drawing board, I mean, if we start to look in 2006 when the ASEAN just start to work, and until now, there are many achievements, many outcomes that ASEAN countries completed, and that should be congratulated to ASEAN country. But for sometimes here in Cambodia, when we have the original discussion among scholars in Cambodia and in ASEAN countries, there are some people who like to call ASEAN as the talk shop. I mean, you go and you talk and you discuss, and then you go back home to start to do your own work. That is some people may say that, but in as a Cambodian, and I believe that ASEAN has the great achievement during the last time. But however, some example that took place during the COVID-19, just would like to raise 2 different points, and then we go back to we go to another question. I think because in ASEAN countries, the 10 ASEAN countries have different benefits with different partners, especially when we start to talk on economic. ASEAN started to, I mean, not started, but ASEAN have different benefits with the EU, with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other countries that is a bit very different from each other in terms of economic. And another important point is the security. Some ASEAN countries, they can depend on other countries to strengthen or to protect their own security. So that is why when the ASEAN members need different, I mean, need different factors in terms of economic and security, So those two factors lead the ASEAN members to have different different determination to strengthen ASEAN country. Because you like it or we like it or not, but ASEAN was interpreted as the association that is not yet strong enough. I mean, that is just the idea. But if we, like Ambassador Ong mentioned, that if we totally understand what is ASEAN, and then we will be able to look at ASEAN in a positive way. And then because there are more opportunity and more challenges that took place to ASEAN right now. Like for example, during this year, right now, I mean this year, because Cambodia is the chair of ASEAN, and then we have so many challenges that are taking place around the world, such as the crisis in Myanmar that is a member of the ASEAN, and the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, and that is the most and sensitive and very hot topic for ASEAN. And then we still have the Korean Peninsula issue that is still the topic that you see that must be written in the ASEAN statement. And this year, Cambodia, as the chair of ASEAN, issued different statement to condemn the North Korea that launched the missile tests or something like that. So just I will go and brief, and I'm happy to answer to other questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samsun. So I think this is why we have this dialogue, a lot of interesting exchanges. So I'm expecting more from the next Q&A session, which will start with Ambassador Imura. Please. You are still muted, Ambassador.
Do you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'll be brief, but still I have one comment and two questions. Regarding what Ambassador Singh said, I would like to say that I don't think launching AOIP, ASEAN is trying to encourage ASEAN partners to sign anything. I think it's, for example, Japan launched our idea 2016. Prime Minister Abe gave a speech in Kenya on the occasion of TICAD, Tokyo International Conference on African Development. So already Japan's idea on the Indo-Pacific cooperation is different from AOIP. We, area-wise, it covers, like Indian idea, it covers the west coast of African continent as well. But on the other hand, we expressed our support to AOIP, looking for, while expressing our ideas, free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP, but also we are looking for synergy between AOIP and our idea on FOIP, FOIP. So I think we are not disturbed in any way by what ASEAN is doing through AOIP process. This is just one comment. Secondly, I have two questions being addressed to Ambassador Ong Keng-yong, former secretary, not as Singaporean representative probably, but former ASEAN Secretary General. One question is, I had the impression that at the summit held in Phnom Penh, ASEAN issued, as I said in the initial statement, ASEAN issued ASEAN Leaders Declaration on mainstreaming for priority areas of the AOIP within ASEAN-led mechanisms. So I have the impression that this is finally, we have been waiting for 3 years already, wondering when ASEAN will promote and try to realize this idea, ASEAN's own idea of AOIP. But reading this declaration, we had impression that finally ASEAN is starting to operationalize its own AOIP. So whether my impression is correct or not, I'll be happy if Ambassador Ong Kim-yong clarify me on that point. That's one question. And another question is China's position on the AOIP. As also I said at the beginning, that China has been shifting its stance on the Indo-Pacific cooperation since in favor of ASEAN stance since President Jokowi visited Beijing with China in July. China is originally was opposed to the idea of the AOIP and did not want to engage with other countries regarding AOIP or even cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. But now China seems to be more or less more open-minded toward the cooperation in the Pacific. This is my impression, but I may be wrong. I would be very happy if Ambassador Ong Kim-yong, as former Secretary General of AOIP, can clarify, give us your impression regarding China's positions, probably shifting or not shifting. I'll be very happy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very important intervention, which adds more insights to this, because now we have US, India, and Japan, which is, I think, some of the most important actors engaged in the idea of Indo-Pacific. Before I'm asking the speakers to respond, there is also a question from the audience. By Igusti Putu Narendra Shahputra. The question is on President Biden, Xi Jinping summit that held on last November in Bali had raised an important issues about how US could balance their power in Asia through their defense pacts such as AUKUS, Quad, and FPCI. The problem is several members are from Asia countries, including ASEAN countries. The question, how ASEAN should engage and cooperate with the US to implement AOIP while response to political maneuvers from several member countries to join defense pact that established by the US at the same time. Do you think ASEAN countries' membership in those defense pact could be undermined by could undermine ASEAN centrality principle and endangered AOIP? So we have some questions. I think the questions from Ambassador Imura is directed to Ambassador Ong. So I would like to ask Ambassador Ong to respond to that. And the question on the connection between US-based initiatives such as AUKUS, Quad, and FPCI with AOIP, I would like to ask to Ambassador Campbell, and the question and the response to the comments and those questions also. I would like to ask Dr. Samson on that, and also Ambassador Gurjit Singh. Okay, please, I'll start with Ambassador Ong because many questions are directed to you.
Thank you. I think Imura-san's second question is about China's position on AOIP. I think when Chinese side look at the AOIP elements and then they considered all the reaction of the other ASEAN dialogue partners to AOIP. I suppose there is an appreciation that the AOIP is not designed to be against anybody. If you look at the AOIP again, and I am always reading the AOIP every time when I appear for this kind of discussion. Every time I do it, I think there is a new angle that require reiteration and explanation. But my guess is that China feel that when they study the AOIP in detail and in the broader context, it is really nothing new. If China has consistently supported the ASEAN community building effort in terms of economic integration, free trade agreement, blah, 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 and other aspects of China cooperation with ASEAN countries, they are all inside the AOIP. And if China say they reject the AOIP, it means China reject all what they have committed to work with ASEAN. It cannot be. And that's why it's the genius of the AOIP. We keep looking at AOIP as a kind of security strategic response by ASEAN in view of all the other Indo-Pacific strategic concepts and strategy coming out from US, from Japan, from India, from anybody else. No, the AOIP is an amalgamation of all that our ASEAN member states have been doing. And if you now say that you do not back up the AOIP, then you have to ask your own people from the other sectoral body or other initiative to say, why should we be working with ASEAN on this? Yeah. So if you look at the document really carefully, it is a good thing that the Chinese side now, they won't say openly that they welcome AOIP, but they are now working with ASEAN on how to reinforce the 4 key sectors. We talk about AOIP, we keep forgetting that there are 4 things in there that the ASEAN leaders have boiled down to specific practical things. How to cooperate in the maritime zone, how do we cooperate on economic agreement that we have already signed or on the way there, how do we do more for connectivity master plan which ASEAN have agreed with all the ASEAN dialogue partners, and how do we execute our own respective plan, ASEAN and dialogue partners, to support the UN sustainability goal. These are all things that we all have been doing together, ASEAN together with ASEAN dialogue partners. So I think there may be a lot of other consideration in China. We do not really know how they think about some of these things, but in recent years, last 2 years, there is a positive vibe coming out from China with regard to the AOIP. And in my opinion, it is because after looking at it, studying it, and seeing what has happened since 2019 when the AOIP was first published, there is nothing there to demonstrate that ASEAN is taking side against China. So why should China object to this AOIP when the basis of AOIP consists of a lot of things which China has really agreed to do with ASEAN, including building the railway, building this and that. Okay, with regard to the first question, yeah, ASEAN, how to prioritize AOIP? I go back to my same point. AOIP is basically an integration of all the things that ASEAN have been doing. We put them all together, yeah, and highlighting the 4 sectors that I mentioned. So actually, as long as ASEAN and its dialogue partner are continuing to work on all the agreed initiatives each of us have, and which we have seen being carried out in the past so many years, we are actually operationalizing the AOIP. So that's why I think I have this discussion with Imura-san for a long time, over the last 2 years, in fact. AOIP is a very tricky thing. If you look at it as a response to the FOIP and thinking that it is an ASEAN strategy to deal with all these strategic concepts coming out with regard to Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, then I think we are on the wrong path. What ASEAN had tried to do is to put them all together, as we say, is a narration of what we see happening with all the respective FOIP and other IP or whatever, and we try to put it on to what ASEAN have been doing and see how it evolved over the coming years. So I think we are not concentrated in specifically doing something under AOIP, because everything there in AOIP is ongoing. And as long as we keep doing all those things about ASEAN community building, and from time to time we respond to requests, we have a joint statement with our dialogue partners, such as the most recent one with Australia, and earlier on I mentioned India and Japan. We are actually operationalizing AOIP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong. I'd like to go to Ambassador Campbell on the question on the connection between AOIP and other initiatives.
And actually, I want to sort of build a bit on something that Ambassador Ong said, because I disagree slightly. I see the AIOP, I agree, it is not a security document. It's not a security concept, but I do think it's strategic. And it's strategic in the context of, there were all these other proposals out there, FOIP, the Indian proposal, the US proposal, looking at the Indo-Pacific. And it was very important in that time and in that frame that ASEAN took a position that spoke to where ASEAN was united and what ASEAN wanted to focus upon. It was very important for ASEAN to do that in the context of what was going on in 2018, 2019. And it continues to be important in the areas that have been identified, as you just noted yourself, Ambassador Ong. However, the areas that are covered within the ASEAN Outlook are, as I noted before, they're a bit minimalist. And so this is where I want to pivot to answering the question, Safwan, that you asked me, or that was posed. And I would say that in this space of ASEAN having reached consensus and being able to move forward in a unified way on a relatively limited set of things, which are the areas of important cooperation identified in the Outlook, it is not surprising that individual countries who are members of ASEAN choose to work with other countries within other structures. And yes, I do think that that causes some tension and some strain within ASEAN. I do think that it pulls at this question of ASEAN centrality and of what we mean when we talk about ASEAN centrality. But I think that that's always been a tension or an aspect of the ASEAN, of the relationships among the 10 member states of ASEAN, who have so many things that are different among them, as well as a smaller set of things which unite them within ASEAN. So within the context of the question, I would, I guess, acknowledge the tension, assert that it's always existed, and say that it's important, I think, for dialogue partners, for countries that have a security perspective on what's going on in the region, to be able to find ways to interact with the region individually and collectively on those issues.
Thank you, Piper. I agree with your illumination.
Yes. Now, do you would like to continue on that? But maybe I'd like to ask.
But so far, we got one question you put to us just now about the defense-related agreement from in Indonesia. I want to just quickly make a quick response to answer the question. Otherwise, we may miss it. I think ASEAN member states are not in any of the latest series of unilateral setting, AUKUS or Quad. They are not there, ASEAN member states. The reference to the FPTA, yes, we have Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei. These FPDA, Five Power Defense Arrangement, predated ASEAN's formation itself. It was something that British had done with Malaysia, Singapore, and later Brunei. Yeah, Brunei is not formally part of the Five Power Defense Arrangement. The other two countries are Australia and New Zealand. So this has been there even before all these ASEAN security mechanism came about. So if you talk to all the five countries, they don't see it as part of an ASEAN setting. It's a historical process, and it has been basically designed to look after the security elements in a different era, but in contemporary times, they have evolved into useful cooperative mechanism for training and other purposes. So it should not be mixed with AUKUS or Quad. Yeah, but going forward, I think ASEAN cannot say we cannot agree to other countries in our region doing little things like Quad or doing big things like AUKUS or whatever. But it's how we as ASEAN as a group we absorb these development and make the best of the situation.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned Quad as little thing and
AUKUS as a little thing. It's designed to be humanitarian, HATR, the first instance.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador. So we are running out of time, but maybe one short comments from Dr. Samsun and Ambassador Singh each. Dr. Samsun?
Yes, thank you so much, Sovan. I think let me repeat my words, and I have the same ideas to Ambassador Ong. I mean, because the AOIP is the agreement or is of the ASEAN countries, and that we have to. I do not want to say that we have to respect, but it is the outcome of the ASEAN agreement, and it is what it is our what I mean. It is what we have, and it is the ASEAN. And even though we may have different understanding or different perspective on that, but it is the document of the ASEAN countries. And because ASEAN, we know mean what we have to do. I mean, because the differences in the geography and political leadership and the system, and that is what we have in ASEAN. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ambassador Singh.
Thank you. So just to say that the concluding remarks by my three co-panelists, I have no difference of opinion with them. This is their point of view, which I respect. With Ambassador Ong, everything he says is true, except that he's looking at the documents, and I, as a former diplomat, am looking at the reality. And for me, China is a problem. And maybe to ASEAN, it is not a problem. But I do recognize that for 20 years, ASEAN has not been able to work out a code of conduct. And at the last ASEAN summit, there was a document celebrating the 20 years of the DCOC, showing that the COC has not come. So yes, China agrees with your documents. And what do they do after that? That is the question which troubles me. I don't have a problem with your explanation. I'm just looking at the reality. And I hope that they get better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very short intervention, Dr. Samsun.
Thank you so much. But I think because that always be the problem. I mean, usually there are many questions when talking about China and ASEAN, like Ambassador Singh just mentioned. But I think because the ASEAN countries, and we have the 10. I mean, we have 10 countries in ASEAN, and then because there are so many connections between ASEAN and China, like economics and other things and so on. But in my perspective, usually when association or when countries that have the good connection or relation with China, there always be question or suspicion on that. But in terms of AOIP and China, I think we need to look at each item of the ASEAN, and then why China support that, and why ASEAN is welcome or is happy or are happy to have the good connection with China, India, or South Korea, or Japan, or something like that. I think we need to look at the policy, and then we look, because the ambassador mentioned we welcome all partners. I remember ambassador thing. I stayed in India for 2 years for my master degree. I grateful to the Indian government that, I mean, because I was in Delhi University for political science, I'm so happy for that. But in terms of ASEAN, and because, I mean, sometimes because of the relation between India and China, and because India is also a member of the Quad or something like that, that's just different perspective, different idea from India. But we, the ASEAN, we have our own policy, we have our own principle that we need to follow, and we need to know what is our own benefit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samson. I think that's the point of this discussion, for having honest discussion on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, to understand the differing interpretation on and expectations on that. Honestly, I expected how to say less dynamic discussion, but apparently all of the speakers surpassed my expectation. I expect that diplomats are diplomatic, but it seems like former diplomats are still very much knowledgeable and very much updated, but more brutally honest in the language of Ambassador Singh. So thank you very much for the interesting discussion, and it reminds us to continue reading and looking at the development of the AOIP, and trying to interpret it and exchange our views with different people from different backgrounds. Thank you very much to all finalists.
Thank you.
And all participants. It's very nice discussion. And I'll return the microphone to Afni. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chawan, and all distinguished speakers for the fruitful discussion and interesting debate, which unfortunately has to stop since we will continue with the next session in 10 minutes. Once again, thank you all speakers, and Dr. Chawan, I'm sure everybody's enjoying your session earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the second session, we will have a 10-minute break. So feel free to grab your coffee and be back here at 11 a.m. Jakarta time. All right. Good afternoon from Jakarta, everyone. Welcome back to FPCI GRIPS Conference on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific towards realization of the Indo-Pacific cooperation under AOIP. Without further ado, I would like to invite our moderator for the second and last session of this conference, Ms. Iza Khairina Ibrahim, analyst at ISIS Malaysia. Ms. Iza, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Afni. Welcome everyone to our second session, revisiting the ASEAN Outlook of the Indo-Pacific, Implementation and Development. And for this session, I feel like with our esteemed panelists today, we would like to look deeper into beyond just the rhetoric of the Indo-Pacific, which has gained quite a lot of traction, quite significantly, often seen not only as a renewed as a broader and more inclusive scope beyond the Asia-Pacific lens and framework that we've used that was quite popular for quite a considerable amount of time until the Indo-Pacific has come back into trend, as you can say. And with these sort of debates and questions about it, it has put quite a significant amount of, it has brought on other countries' own interpretations and own respective policies on how not only do they view this region and this lens, but also how do they respond towards it. Quite noticeably, ASEAN had its own, alongside other countries such as the United States, Japan, Australia, India, and it came up with its own outlook. But the problem is, despite 3 years after its formulation, the progress on fulfilling these objectives set out by the framework remains quite slow. And because of this, it was widely criticized to be lacking the sort of teeth they need to deal with the increasing geostrategic rivalry and other pressures that come together with this region. And today, we will start unpacking and discussing these sort of topics with our panel, with our speakers. We will go through first with their own talking points before we will engage in a broader discussion where Q&A is also welcomed later. And so first, I will introduce our first speaker, Professor Alexis Jamadu, professor at the University of Pelita Harapan.
Thank you, Iza. And I should like to thank also FPCI for having me here. Among this group of prominent scholars and prominent persons. I think I have to start with the disclaimer. I will represent myself, so my talk will be based on purely academic judgment, I hope. But I'm afraid that I cannot avoid my bias for my own country. So there are a few points I want to share with you. I think that the AOIP is a discursive representation of the aspirations of ASEAN members as the combination of small and middle powers for what the dynamics of the Indo-Pacific region should look like. So it represents what they want this region to be. Yeah? The ASEAN members want to convey the message that they have their own view on how to manage the interactions of all states in this region, including the rules of the game in economy, security, and other important issues. They know that each of the great powers like United States, China, India, Japan have their own concepts according to their respective strategic interests and calculation. But as a regional entity, ASEAN do not want to be led or forced to embrace any other concept which may not necessarily serve their best interest. What is interesting to observe is that each of these great powers has expressed their positive view or support of the AOIP. I suspect it is more out of pragmatic consideration rather than a permanent standpoint. We can say that despite the fact that the great powers have their own strategic concept of the Indo-Pacific region, they also give rooms for pragmatic policies, especially related to the narrative of economic interdependence and its institutionalization, in which their own interests are also embedded. The non-clarity of the AOIP is understandable, and it is not necessarily a liability or a weakness. If it is meant to be open and inclusive, then you should allow certain level of ambiguity, or you may call it non-clarity, so that each member or participant may substantiate any cooperation opportunity that may emerge out of this friendly interaction. Such ambiguity can also be related to the fact that the ASEAN members tend to avoid any singularization of the narrative of international politics in this region. They acknowledge the importance of the narrative of economic interdependence, but at the same time, they also need the presence of each of these great powers, as long as each of them seeks to support regional stability and prosperity, instead of building its own domination or preponderance. I believe that people will expect much from Indonesia's chairmanship, in the sense that the ASEAN centrality can be strengthened as a pragmatic modality of easing tension whenever such eventuality might emerge from the dynamics of the contestation of power in this region. It is always important to have a regional entity capable of reaching out to all great powers, and Indonesia is capable of playing that role. Considering its diplomatic credentials, both among the ASEAN members and in the eyes of the great powers, ASEAN should make a concrete proposals of cooperation to substantiate the spirit behind this concept. That is to give more room for positive cooperation rather than sticking to contestation of power or struggle for domination or preponderance. ASEAN should come up with a clear idea how to build the habit of cooperation and urge the great powers to socialize into the international norms of cooperation and interdependence, and always seek to promote common interest rather than unilateral approach or action that could be destabilizing and jeopardizing regional stability. Last but not least, I think that the idea of AOIP should be inclusive. It is feasible and acceptable to a certain calculative degree. The fact that the concept has invited positive reactions from the great powers is an indication that they actually allow it to develop and follow its own course and produce its pragmatic intended benefits through concrete cooperation by maximizing opportunities that might emerge from the economic dynamics of the region as a whole. Having said that, the ASEAN members, I think, cannot entirely rule out the possibility of the pendulum of international politics moving towards a kind of Hobbesian tendencies of power contestation, rather than the Grothian or rational eventualities of normative cooperation. After all, global economic interests normally require a suitable and credible military protection. Indonesia's G20 presidency achievements constitute Indonesia's diplomatic credentials in navigating an international situation in which the interests of great powers can be reconciled for the benefits of all parties. Indonesia is capable of reaching out to all great powers and send the message that the regional stability and prosperity will also benefit them, considering the growing potentialities of ASEAN members individually and collectively. Thank you, Isa.
Thank you very much, Professor Alexius. For now, we'll move on to our second speaker, Professor Rory Metcalf, Head of the National Security College at the Australian National University.
Hello, and thank you very much for bearing with me. I just had a few connectivity issues, but I'm very happy to be with you all today. And I think my commendations to FPCI for hosting this really important discussion and for including my voice. Look, I would offer a couple of thoughts as really an Australian academic and security scholar who's followed the Indo-Pacific story for quite a long time now. And I've taken a very close interest in that time in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. I will just begin by picking up on one or two comments from the preceding speaker, and I think there were some very pertinent points there, very understandable from I guess a perspective in Southeast Asia. But looking at the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I would start by saying, do not be too hard on yourselves. I think it was a significant achievement to craft that document. In my view, it showed significant leadership from Indonesia in progressive thinking within ASEAN, and it is early days. The principles that are elucidated in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific are actually quite powerful and quite influential. I think if you think about the sequence of the ways in which other countries and partners have come to embrace their own versions of the Indo-Pacific idea, and it is very important to say that there is no one firm Indo-Pacific doctrine. It is a kind of a rich landscape of thinking about regional order. But if you do think about the others, I'm thinking of the European Union, I'm thinking individual countries such as Germany or the Netherlands, or indeed very recently Canada. If you look at the way that countries in Asia, such as the Republic of Korea, are now individually beginning to look at the Indo-Pacific, I think ASEAN was, in fact, a leader in that sense, because ASEAN, with the Outlook, pursued the most inclusive vision of an Indo-Pacific order in some tension with the, if you like, the free and open Indo-Pacific policy positions of Japan and especially the United States under the Trump administration, but or indeed with the Australian or Indian positions. But ASEAN has struck a genuinely inclusive middle ground there, and so just at the level of declaratory policy alone, the Outlook is an achievement. Now, I entirely agree that we're in difficult strategic times and words are not enough, and words really need to be a framework for policy and a framework for action. So what next? I would just put a few thoughts on the table there, because again, like ASEAN, like the ASEAN-centric regional organisations of our region, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is a work in progress, but the strategic times are moving quickly. And I think whether that's the concerns about the assertive impact of Chinese power on the region, whether that's concerns about the risk of clashes or conflict or miscalculation, the geopolitical picture is not standing still. To therefore take next steps on the ASEAN Outlook and its implementation, I would think very hard about how we make much better use of regional institutions. And when I say we, I guess the burden there is for ASEAN countries, but also for dialogue partners, friends of ASEAN, Australia among them. And that is, how do we take institutions like the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ADMM Plus process, how do we take those institutions and really inject more ambition into their agendas and inject more pressure and expectation on those institutions to perform? I'm thinking areas like much more robust information sharing within the region on the risks that we face, whether it's risks of resource depletion and overfishing, whether it's risks related to miscalculation and potential conflict. But these institutions are, I think, not being driven hard enough by our governments. It's really up to leaders, for example, in the East Asia Summit, to use the extraordinary opportunity they have of that convening power to drive more ambitious conversations. But bureaucracies, foreign policy and other bureaucracies in the other institutions can and should do more to take elements of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific vision and inject those into work streams or create new work streams under the umbrella of, for example, the ARF or the ADMM+. So I think a bit of ambition there. At the same time, I think that the vision of connectivity that's embodied in the AOIP is one that's not going to be for ASEAN alone. And so again, I think it is reasonable for individual ASEAN countries to work with individual partners outside of the ASEAN circle, with dialogue partners like Australia, like Japan, like India, and like Europe, which is showing so much more interest now in the strategic future of the region, and to identify where there are convergent principles around sovereignty or international law, to identify specific bilateral or minilateral initiatives that we can take. I'm going to pause in a moment, but just one observation that I think is still in play is that we have this very dynamic regional architecture. It's in flux. We have new institutions. We have minilateral institutions. We have the Quad, for example. We also have efforts by the United States to really try to come up with some non-military, non-security elements of its Indo-Pacific engagement. And I do think that colleagues in some ASEAN countries sometimes underestimate actually how much agency they have to engage all of that interest in ways that add to regional stability. Last point, of course, goes to the question of China and the question of how do we engage with China, whether it's through the framework of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific or whether it's through other national or international frameworks. Now, it's fair to say that China is probably in a moment of tactical recalibration of its regional assertiveness and that, or indeed its relations with the United States, but I still see considerable risk for the regional order in the short to medium term. But now is an opportunity to really have those conversations, attempt that dialogue with the Chinese policy system to reinforce the view that an inclusive Indo-Pacific framework is not something that's designed to exclude China. It's designed to set agreed standards and rules that all powers can live by, for example, in sync with the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation. Now, we know that the strategic establishments of great powers don't always mean what they say when they smile and agree to the principles that we point out to them. And I think China in particular has got a huge amount of reassurance to give to the region because, if anything, strategic mistrust of China has increased greatly in recent years. But the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is at least a variant of the Indo-Pacific that the Chinese system may feel the need to appear to come to terms with. And that is a starting point that we need to work with during these difficult times. Thanks for listening, and I'm really keen to join the questions that will follow.
Thank you very much. We'll be following on with our next one. Professor Cha Dao-Jung from the he's a professor of international political economy at the School of International Studies in Peking University.
Thank you very much. Certainly, I just speak for myself, and I'm happy to join the discussion, although this is a very difficult topic, partly because there is some academic discussions about free and open Indo-Pacific, but the term is not included in the official narrative. If and to the extent it is, I just checked the website of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the English version. The commentaries are overwhelmingly negative, but about that notion. And then for me as an academic person, free and open Indo-Pacific, that's one of the expressions. The second expression is AUKUS, Australia, UK, and US. Now quickly, that's going to become a third, as we are reading in the news, JOCS, Japan, Australia, US, and UK, and then Quad, right? That's so the, oh gosh, these acronyms keep flying. What's all the excitement? On the other hand, there seems to be a convergence, de facto convergence in the style of narratives. Chinese narratives on this, normally it can be characterized as more liberalist in standard international relations theory. In other words, we talk about the challenges. We don't openly identify a country's source of enemy, and we call for multilateral approaches. So those acronyms, including free and open Indo-Pacific, falls into that tradition. So in some ways, there is a convergence of approach. Now, if that can qualify as the second point, my third observation is that China itself has a difficulty, I would say it's a difficulty, in communicating to the rest of the world what it wants. If you recall, in the wake of the Cold War, China offered what was called a new security concept in relating to Southeast Asia. And that started to evolve to what in February this year, the Global Security Initiative. And then the Chinese framings, certainly there is a discursive element to it, do not always address the questions about Chinese intent. Although to me, it does seem to, the Chinese intent seems to be clear. That is a focus on territory-based security in more specifically Taiwan, the East China Sea, South China Sea territorial disputes. Although the nuances in the Chinese vocabulary is such that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, but then the same framing is not applied to discussions about the East China Sea or South China Sea, certainly not in Chinese texts. So we have a competition of framing of what is conducive to the pursuit of predictability or the pursuit of, let's say, peace. Everyone talks about peace in the region. That's normal. But then what do we do? I would think we should be reminding ourselves that the trajectory of security is never straightforward, but the role ASEAN has played in, it's hard to use a proper English language word for this. The role of ASEAN here is really critical. If you look at the sort of anxieties about major powers, be that Russia or China, I mean Soviet Union, you know, China, the United States, or even at one point of time Japan, ASEAN has done a marvelous job in terms of bringing the various interests together. ARF, APEC, the in trade, the RCEP, and then the ministerial meetings or the meetings plus. I would think so long as we keep ASEAN centrality in place, we have a better chance of at least keeping the channels of dialogue open rather than leaving this to a sharply framed so-called big power or major power competition. So let me stop here, and later I will be looking forward to questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang. We're moving on to our next speaker, Professor Tsutomu Kikuchi, the Emeritus Professor of Aoyama Gakuin University.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ida-san. And first of all, I would express my thanks to GRIPS and also Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia for giving me this opportunity to speak at this conference. So today I would talk about, how ASEAN and its partners could make use of AOIP to create a more inclusive and pluralistic and also multi-centric rule-based order in Indo-Pacific. So today, in these regions, competition and conflict between major powers intensify. So many experts argue that major power relations, especially the US-China bilateral dynamics, will determine the future international order of the Indo-Pacific. So indeed, US-China relations are quite important, but not the only factors defining the international relation of the regions. So I would argue that the Indo-Pacific is now in transitional phase towards more inclusive and a plurilateral multicentric regional orders in which the diverse group of the states will also play a quite important role to maintain and strengthen the rule-based international order here. So our challenge is how to manage this transition without military conflict or other big disruptions. The key to this is a promotion of collective effort to further enhance the national resilience of the country in the regions. So AOIP has a significant role to play in this regional context. So AOIP is a kind of manifest by ASEAN countries for Indo-Pacific cooperation, setting out the tasks to be undertaken by countries of the region to build a rule-based regional orders. So it also means that by addressing the challenges set out in AOIP, ASEAN countries will enhance their national and regional resilience, thereby enabling them to be important players in maintaining the regional rule-based regional orders. Also contributing to realizing the ASEAN community building initiatives. So national resilience is the most important foundation for rule-based orders. And regional cooperation to implement AOIP could be quite diverse. Already, so many other speakers pointed out. That could involve cooperation between certain ASEAN member states and countries outside Southeast Asia. There may be some cooperation through regional institutions such as East Asia Summit. Today, I would like to point out the possibility of cooperation between ASEAN and Quad, the cooperative forum between Japan, US, Australia, and India. So Quad will certainly become one of the key pillars of regional architecture for peace and prosperities of the Indo-Pacific in the coming years and decades. The cooperation between ASEAN and Quad will further facilitate the implementation of the AOIP and contribute to strengthening the resilience of ASEAN countries. Already, as previous, at the last previous sessions, some distinguished speaker already mentioned, Japan, India, Australia have been strongly committed to the implementation of AOIP. So through this, ASEAN could become quite important pillar of inclusive and pluralistic Indo-Pacific rule-based orders. That is not solely defined by major power relations. And actually, since 2007, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States have been searching for the most appropriate agenda and form of quadrilateral cooperation. And Quad finally come to common understanding of the objectives to be pursued, the challenges to address, and the way to achieve them. Quad aims to strengthen free, open, inclusive, and rule-based regional orders in these regions. And Quad is maintaining and strengthening the public goods through addressing such areas as maritime security, supply chain resilience, and so forth. So Quad is not alliance, but more than alliance. The network of alliance has been one of the important components of so-called rule-based international orders. So alliance still remains quite critically important factor today. And Quad could be additional component of regional balance of power that is indispensable for rule-based orders. But alliance is not model of Quad. Quad will not become Asian NATO. But Quad has the potential to develop into more innovative regional institution than alliance. So Quad institutional innovation lies in its flexible and multi-layered institutional structures. So Quad creating a new type of networks to address the diverse challenges facing our regions. First, intra-Quad relations. Quad cooperation is multi-layered, including bilateral, trilateral, and also quadrilateral cooperation among 4 countries. So bilateral, trilateral cooperation among Quad member countries are quite important building blocks for the overall effectiveness of the Quad. Actually, for the last more than decades, bilateral relations among Quad countries have been greatly improved, especially our respective relation with India. And those bilateral, trilateral, and quadrilateral cooperation are mutually reinforcing each other. Second, Quad has additional component, that is Quad plus X formulation connecting with non-member countries. And flexible and inclusive institutional structure of Quad is quite useful in promoting cooperation with non-Quad countries. Actually, Quad member countries have been enhancing cooperation with non-Quad countries bilaterally, trilaterally, and quadrilaterally, including some of the ASEAN countries. And actually, Quad seek to enhance resilience of the state in the region through cooperation wide range of issue areas, as I mentioned. And the increased resilience of Indo-Pacific countries, including ASEAN member countries, coupled with nationalism of these countries, their strong, deep-seated sense of sovereignty, independence, and autonomy will make them quite important players in maintaining and strengthening the Indo-Pacific rule-based orders. And as a result of strengthening of state resilience through Quad cooperation with ASEAN countries, Indo-Pacific regional order will become more inclusive, the pluralistic, and also multi-centric, with diverse states playing a meaningful role in maintaining of the orders. Of course, this process of building inclusive and pluralistic, multi-centric regional orders take time, but we must not lose our long-term perspective. The AOIP can make a great contribution to the formation of this inclusive and pluralistic Indo-Pacific rule-based orders. I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Higuchi-san. And now we've gone to our final speaker, Ms. Big Tran, a visiting fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Hi, thanks, Isa. I just want to update that it was my old affiliation. I started a visiting fellowship with IC Yusof Ishak Institute this month. And I was also to thanks FPCI IP and GRIPS for having me here. So my understanding of AOIP is that it has two main goals. The first one is to enhance ASEAN's community building process. And the second goal is to strengthen existing ASEAN-led mechanisms. So in 2021, during the 13th National Congress of the Communist Party, Vietnam echoed these objectives by committing to actively and responsibly work with ASEAN countries to build a strong and united community, as well as maintain ASEAN's central role in regional security architecture. So in more familiar terms, I think these two objectives are about ASEAN unity and ASEAN centrality. So I think the order of the two things makes sense because if ASEAN is not united, how can it effectively coordinate other mechanisms that it is leading? So I think that in the last session, other speakers, maybe they already talked about multilateralism and about ASEAN's concern that those things challenge its centrality. So I couldn't attend the entire session one, so I'm not sure whether if any speaker already clarified what ASEAN centrality means. I see that Ambassador Ong Keng Yong is here with us, so I hope that he can let me know during the discussions. So my understanding is that ASEAN centrality is not about ASEAN is the most important platform, but I think it means that ASEAN is in the middle of a network and offer venues for other countries in the region to come and talk and hopefully to act together on common issues. But you know, when the parties cannot agree on certain issues and the conversation cannot move forward, I think it's better to have other mechanisms like the Quad or AUKUS, where their members are like-minded and they can move things forward. So to revisit AOIP, I think ASEAN should accept that it's not always the best place for every issues, and other multilateral mechanisms actually complement it. not challenge it. But first, it needs to be unified to improve its effectiveness. I think that only by proving its usefulness, ASEAN can maintain its relevance. So I stop here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll be moving into both it's a mix of both the interactive discussion and also the Q&A that's coming in. And for the first one, we do have a question that is directed to Professor Metcalf. And the question is from Andy Sparinga from Ministry of Foreign Affairs Indonesia. He asks that there have been many discussions on the implementation of the AOIP with its dialogue partners, including with Australia. And given the dynamic nature of geopolitical challenges, out of the 4 areas of priority under the AOIP, what are the most important sectors that should be prioritized in the immediate future? And furthermore, do you see any opportunities for existing minilateral groupings in the region, including Quad and AUKUS, to synergize efforts or initiatives with ASEAN-led mechanisms?
Is that
Yep. Professor Metcalf, with us?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I had connectivity issues. Would you like me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I missed the beginning of the question due to the connectivity issues, but
No worries.
I understand it's to do with connecting AOI with other arrangements.
Yes, that's the second half. The first half would be which of the 4 areas of priority should they prioritize in the immediate future?
Okay. Look, I would, to be honest, I would actually turn it around and actually begin by identifying
Yeah. Actually, for the meantime, until Professor Metcalf can reconnect, I think I'll open this to the floor actually to all of our other speakers as well. What do you think should be prioritized? Because we do have like a very range of people with different interests as well, including an economic perspective from Professor Jia. So anyone would like to speak first?
My apologies for dropping out. Would you like to quickly answer that last question? I can leave the floor open to other speakers.
Yeah, sure.
So rather than identify work stream of priority, I would actually look at the partnerships. I would flip it around just simply because we need to work with, I guess, where there is appetite for cooperation. And I think that it's probably most realistic for ASEAN to be working with individual external partners rather than, anything like formalizing ASEAN Quad or other structured engagement. I would I'm sorry, I'll come back later in the session when my connection is better.
All right, thank you. Kikuchi-san, you had your hand raised just then. You can proceed, thanks.
In case of Japan, already the 86 or 89 project identified as a part of the implementation of AOIP. So Japan have been quite deeply engaged in implementation of AOIP. And in my understanding, we don't have any specific priority on the specific areas. And usually, we picked up the specific project, after consultation with the individual, ASEAN member countries who are, interested in promoting specific, projects and so forth. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have anyone, Big or Professor Alexis, do you have any similar other comments or any insights to share as well?
Yes, I think it is a good question to know what is the priority of cooperation that should be promoted. I think there are two things for international cooperation to take place. First of all, there should be a commonality of interest. And second, I think the complementarity of resources you have for that cooperation to be materialized. And as far as Indonesia is concerned, I think being in the middle of all these dynamic of interactions in this region and having declared itself to be the global maritime fulcrum, maritime connectivity and maritime cooperation should be on the top priority of Indonesian government, because there are a lot of opportunities that Indonesia and foreign partners can do together in order to explore the potentials of our maritime resources that until now haven't been optimally explored. That's my answer.
All right, thank you very much. Big, do you have anything else? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So, among the 4 areas of cooperations, my opinion is that, maybe maritime security is a little too sensitive among them. But I think regional countries already doing a lot in terms of economic cooperations, with all the free trade agreements being signed and ratified. So maybe something, I think the 4th area on sustainable development maybe could receive more attentions, because, I think ASEAN, in the is a perfect place for, renewable energies, such as solar energies. And I know that I think Vietnam is actually leading Southeast Asia in this area, because there is a lot of sun in the region. So I think, our dialogue partners can help Southeast Asian countries to develop this kind of renewable energies. Thanks.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, actually, because I think I've read there have been with other discussions as well, like even the EU is actually seeking to connect with ASEAN quite almost exclusively on that region, and that's why quite a lot of them argue that it's one of the safer international partners to go towards, because they're not talking about something so controversial. I'll just pass over to Professor Jha first, and then we'll go back to you. Yeah, you can unmute. Go ahead.
No, I thought Kikuchi-san was.
No, Jha-san, you are first.
I'll pass you. Yeah.
I thought, just following Madam Tran's comment on energy, solar is useful, but it's intermittent. And also, you have the issue of competition for land use. In certain areas of the world, they have large deserts. Solar makes sense, but across Southeast Asia, whereby you need land for agriculture, solar is useful, but probably limited in many ways, partly because of intermittency. But certainly in Vietnam, Laos, or Cambodia, much of Indochina, solar energy, especially as a poverty alleviation strategy, is going to be quite useful. But nevertheless, the large industrialization, Southeast Asia ought to consider nuclear power. I understand it's controversial, but nuclear power is a viable choice, especially when you have the fourth generation nuclear power plants that are coming online. And even with the EU, if you look at the EU under French leadership, it's branding nuclear and rebrand nuclear and LNG to be green. So we are really talking about the base load of energy for Indonesia, for Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, whichever Southeast Asian country. When your level of industrialization moves up, the requirement for stable loads of stable electricity supply to meet the increased loads for quality of the basic loads is quite important. Solar, if for any of these frameworks we talk about to make sense, we have to deliver real benefits to the real societies. And for that matter, just because nuclear word is quote unquote controversial in the public mind does not mean it should be ruled out in the discussion.
So can I have two finger here keep talking about nuclear energy and by asking Professor Kikuchi a question about Japan? So because, with the energy crisis, do you think that Japan will, come back to operate its nuclear power plants? And I think that, if for the idea from Professor Zhang, I think that Japan would be a perfect partner for Southeast Asia if they actually want to develop nuclear power plants. Thanks.
Kikuchi-san, go ahead. You can reply to both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No worries.
On the nuclear powers, yes, we are facing some serious, the shortage of the electricity right now, because we have more than 56 or 57 nuclear power stations, but now is only few stations working. And overcome this, shortage of electricity, and also given our, new consideration for, impact on the climate changes, I think, the deactivate the nuclear power station would be one of the options. And in my understanding, government now considering how, the old nuclear power station should be, devitalized and they extend the some life, the cycle of the individual nuclear power station and so forth. Just 10 or 20 years expansion from existing 40 years, the time limit and so forth. So I think that if current energy situation continues, we the nuclear power station, rely on the nuclear power station is the most feasible option for Japan in the coming decade and so forth. And on the previous the question on the which areas we should put to implement on the 4 areas identified in AOIP. Probably in case of Japan, maritime security is a relatively new area of cooperation with ASEAN countries, because other 3 areas, we have a long histories in our bilateral dealing with ASEAN. Connectivities. Japan is one of the key countries who deeply engage in the infrastructure building in Southeast Asian countries. Also, we have long history of economic cooperation and so forth. And SDG, sometimes SDG include everything, and everything could be included in the category of the SDGs. And so the maritime security is a new area of cooperation between Japan, ASEAN countries. But mostly this is relating to strengthening, contributing the capacity building of ASEAN countries. For us, more than 10 years, Japan deeply engaged in establishing a Coast Guard agency in some Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and so forth. And also we have been providing Coast Guard vessels to some of the Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia, and so forth. So we continue to be engaged in capacity building, cooperation with the individual Southeast Asian countries. And also, in case of maritime security, as you know, the last Quad meeting held in Tokyo in May, 4 countries agreed, so-called Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Project. And the purpose of this new initiative is to provide real-time information on the activities of ships in Indo-Pacific by using existing fusion center located in India, Singapore, and also Solomon Island, and so forth. That could be a quite important, contribution for the ASEAN countries. ASEAN countries can quite easily identify illegal, shipping operating in Southeast Asian Sea and so forth. So I think, in the coming years, such cooperation for further implementing the maritime awareness, maritime domain awareness initiative could be further pursued in our relation with ASEAN countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Metcalf, I hope hopefully now your internet's stable enough to come in.
Yeah, look, thank you. And my apologies for the problem earlier. Look, first I would echo, I think, the very wise observations by my Japanese colleague just now, because although I can understand why at one level maritime security could be seen to be a little controversial, it depends enormously how we define maritime security. If we're looking at the stewardship of the global commons, at the stewardship of maritime resources, at things like understanding the pressure on fisheries, at things like policing illegal fishing and so forth, then it's actually quite uncontroversial, I think, for ASEAN collectively and for ASEAN plus its friends and partners to take a very strong interest. So I would suggest that two principles going forward on cooperation. One is, as I said before, let's focus on those partners who are ready to play. I'd certainly include Australia in that list. I think Japan clearly as well. I'd also note, I think, reinforce the view that the European Union is now getting serious about the Indo-Pacific, and in areas like civilian capacity building, maritime security, international law, there would be an enormously helpful partner to engage. And then going to the substantive issues, I would actually suggest we do need to look at maritime security and at standards. And I think standards for infrastructure would be a second point to note. Infrastructure not only across ASEAN, but in terms of ASEAN's connectivity with the broader region, developing some shared understandings about what are sustainable standards for infrastructure, whether it's through investment or development assistance, I think could be quite a useful consensus building tool going forward. Last of all, and I'm going to have to leave in a moment, unfortunately, my last point would be that sooner or later, the region is going to have to come to terms with questions about confidence building measures, questions about so-called guardrails to prevent risks of miscalculation and conflict. And there, I think sooner or later, we are going to have to encourage the ASEAN-centric institutions to engage. And in fact, the principles under the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific and the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation are tailor-made for that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, despite all the connections. And now we have one final question from our Q&A. I'm just going to wrap this up. And it's a question from Matthias, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They asked that India, Indonesia, the maritime Indian Ocean, and the West Coast Sumatra and Australia has been left untouched concerning people mobility, biodiversity and energy exploration between those three neighbors. How this Indo-Pacific ASEAN initiative or cooperation can this, okay, hold on. Like, how can this initiative and cooperation work?
Can I jump in first on that, please?
Please go ahead.
Yeah,
Happy to have you back.
And hear colleagues say, but just to note that among the various sub-regional arrangements that could be very complementary to the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I'm glad that the Australia, India, Indonesia trilateral has been mentioned, because there is an evolving body of work, a trilateral dialogue and cooperation there. We do have obviously contiguous maritime zones, and in a way, if we can develop standards for environmental preservation and resource exploitation in a sustainable way among those three countries, and maritime domain awareness of civilian and commercial behaviour, then that can be a really interesting model for other parts of the region. So I think that's one of those mini-laterals that's perfectly made to demonstrate that the ASEAN Outlook is a good model. Thank you.
Nice. And actually, we do have a hand raised by Ambassador Ong Keng Yong. Actually, please welcome your intervention.
Oh, thank you, Isa. I thought I should just respond to what Big Tran asked about ASEAN centrality. Yeah, since it's a good time for me to talk a little bit about this very important concept in ASEAN work. Basically, it goes back to the geography. Yes, we are in the center between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. But that means that Southeast Asia is a critical space on Earth for people from Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, to go to the Middle East, to Europe, and for Middle Easterners and Europeans to come via Southeast Asia to China, to Japan, Korea, and even beyond that to United States and Canada. So as a result, Southeast Asia is a very strategic geographical location, and therefore many other external powers over history would be interested in doing things in Southeast Asia the way they prefer, the way they want Southeast Asian nation to facilitate their transit through this region, to work with other Asian or countries in Asia Pacific region. Therefore, what the Southeast Asian countries have done from 1967 is to come together, and say, we cannot stop people from coming to Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asian culture is generally open and inclusive, welcoming. So what we do is that we construct a series of processes and mechanisms, which we call now the ASEAN regional architecture. So with this regional architecture, it is supposed to give us a predictable way of interacting with one another, among ourselves in Southeast Asia and between Southeast Asian nations and others from outside the region. So that originated into, that idea now become what we call ASEAN centrality. So what we are saying in ASEAN centrality is not that if we are not there, we are not going to be helping you, or we're not interested in what you're doing. What we are saying is that since now we have a regional architecture, we like to engage other countries, other powers in mutually rewarding activities, whether politics or strategic or economic or social cultural. But in so doing, we should not ignore the fact that we have an ASEAN-centered architecture. There are different ASEAN-centered mechanisms and processes. And one of the most important principles here is that we have a rules-based regional architecture. Everybody is welcome. Everybody can work with one another, either collectively, ASEAN Plus, or individual ASEAN country with whoever want to work with us in Southeast Asia. But we go back to one basic thing, which is rules-based order. So it's a rules-based multilateral order. Everybody is welcome. and we can work together. If we cannot work together, then what do we do? And again, over there, ASEAN has devised various sets of processes. And as Professor Rory McCullough said, we also need to think about how to have CBMs, confidence building measures, how to strengthen or build the trust and confidence that other countries coming through Southeast Asia can work with ASEAN or ASEAN member states individually to create that kind of positive, constructive approach. And the whole idea, therefore, is that Southeast Asia or the ASEAN region must be a stable, secure place for us in the region, and as well as for other people who transit through or who come to Southeast Asia for business and whatever they want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ong.
And thank you very much for that. And that, unfortunately, we ran out of time, and actually I think we kind of went over time, but thank you very much for everyone's responses, the questions and the interventions made. They were all very insightful. And I think it's important to recognize as well how important our understanding and conceptualizations translate into what we plan to do and how to make the most out of it. And with that, I shall pass back to our MC. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Kikuchi-san. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you on panel. Thank you very much, all.
Okay, Yon-san. See you in Jakarta.
See you.
Right?
Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ms. Iza, and all the speakers for bringing us a very productive session today. Also, thank you to all the participants, both joining from our Zoom room and our YouTube channel. I believe all that are tuning in here today have had a fruitful discussion and gained new knowledge from our speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of FPCI GRIPS conference on ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Today's event is available for a rewatch on FPCI YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. Thank you once again, everyone, and see you at our next event.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
See
Thank
you in Jakarta soon.